All right, welcome to Right Hive. I am Jeni Chappelle. I am one of the editors in residence for the Right Hive community. I'm a freelance editor. I've been doing that for about 12 years. And I'm also a co-founding member and board member for RevPit. So I'm just kind of like all over the place in the writing community. Um, and yes, I am here to talk about my podcast with my co host, Carly Hayward. And I'll let Carly introduce herself and the podcast a little bit.
I mean, I could just have you introduce me. That would be fun.
That would be fabulous. So, Carly is all kinds of trouble. You don't want to
hmm
listen to her,
hmm hmm
except when she agrees with me.
Yeah, that about sums it up.
Perfect.
No, I'm Carly Hayward. I'm also a freelance developmental editor. I love the Right Hive community. Jeni and I both work with RevPit and have this podcast together and are in Right Hive together. So that's fun for us. But
We
other than
basically
that,
just follow each other everywhere. That's what
yeah,
happens.
it's fine. I mean,
We can't do anything without the other one. And when we do, it's just miserable.
it
So
just doesn't go well. So, yeah, but that's basically me.
why don't you doing the podcast was really your idea. So why don't you get started with kind of where the idea came from? Why don't you introduce the podcast first?
Okay. So, Story Chat Radio is a wonderful podcast, if I do say so myself, where Jeni and I watch a different movie every month to find different storytelling and writing elements that you can use to become a better writer. I think we started it a year and a half ago
Ish, yeah.
ish. It's been really great. I basically wanted an excuse for Jeni and I to talk more. Um, and we just wanted to create more writing content or editing content for writers um, without having to write ourselves. So we decided we'll just talk to each other and record it for everyone to listen to if they are so inclined.
Right.
Um, I think it took us a while to come up with our kind of topic and theme, what we
Sure.
wanted it to even be. Um, but I'm really happy with it. I feel like it's gone really well. We've got some really
Right.
fun movies.
Yeah. So the kind of theme of the podcast is taking storytelling advice from movies. So, we can read the advice is read when you want to write and you want to improve your writing craft.
hmm
But really you can get writing advice, you can see storytelling in motion in really any kind of story format. So that can be it can be movies, it can be books, it can be video games, some podcasts, short stories, of course. So there's all different kinds of media that you can get storytelling information from. Now, it's not always, you can immediately see how to take this information and apply it to your own writing. But I think that it can be really helpful to take in all of these different formats so that you can see and kind of pull from all of that information.
hmm
And I think maybe movies and books are more closely related than say like books and video games, because video
Yeah,
games don't necessarily have to have that same kind of structure to them.
it's
Um,
true. And the video
so
games that do are compared to movies. So,
Right. It's true. It's true. So yeah, so for the podcast, we pick a movie ahead of time and we try to pick something a little different every month.
hmm
So we're not just doing like the same kinds of movies all the time, so that we can cover all different kinds of stories, different kinds of characters, and look at different elements. And then so when I prepare for this, we pick the movie out ahead of time, and then normally like the day before we're supposed to record.
or like an hour before, either
um
works.
so sometime before though, um
Yeah.
I'll watch the movie, And it's been really neat. First of all, sometimes we watch movies that neither of us have seen or only one of us has seen, but it's been really cool rewatching movies that I have seen before.
Yeah.
So like most recently, I think that was probably The Shape of Water. I had seen The Shape of Water before, but watching it again, it's so different to watch something just to enjoy it than it
Mm-hmm.
is when you're watching it from an analytical standpoint. And I think it's the same with writing, really. Like when you're
Yeah.
reading something just to read and just enjoy it, it's a lot different than when you're kind of picking it apart.
Yes.
Um,
Although it can be hard to turn that editor brain off.
it
I will
can.
say.
It can. I think probably a lot of people watching this have had the experience of, like books or movies or television shows sort of being ruined for them because they
Mm-hmm.
have started learning about craft and they can sort of pick out those bad elements now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pretty much do the same thing. I'm trying to remember the last movie we did that I had actually seen. It was probably Clue,
Yeah.
because that was pretty recently. Hadn't seen Shape of Water. And I love Clue. I love that movie so
It's such a
much.
good
It's
movie.
so good. But it was interesting to really kind of get into it and pick it apart and be like, what does this movie excel at?
Yeah.
What is making this such a successful, enjoyable experience? Is it just that Tim Curry is amazing? Probably.
Maybe.
But
That's definitely a
why?
big part of it.
But why is he amazing? And I think we landed on dialogue and and part of that is really Tim Curry and how well he portrays the dialogue and gets it out there. But it's also the writing of the dialogue, and you can kind of really pick apart the different dialogue elements that he uses and figure out how you can use that in your own writing. And I thought it's just a really fun way to watch a movie, I think. But
Right. And so
I'm
that's
also a nerd, so
right. So I think that's typically our next step in the process. Then we watch the movie and then we kind of come together and we decide what did this movie do really well that we want to talk about. We decided pretty early on in the process that we did not want to, we don't want to like bash anybody,
no,
We don't feel like that's really the goal here. We do sometimes in the podcast touch on elements that we feel like maybe weren't as successful,
me
but
too.
it's really not our goal. We want to kind of help you take away the positives
Yep.
and see what you can use to enhance your own writing. So yeah, so we will watch the movie, then we'll come back together and kind of talk about what it did well, what some themes in it were, all of those kinds of things. And we'll come up with a topic for that episode. And then we do have kind of like an outline that we talk from.
Yeah.
And we get together and record it. And it's so much fun because it is really like just having a conversation with a friend who also happens to be like a major story nerd and
Hmm.
uh
Hmm.
so and we do have a tendency to agree on things but not always 100%, and even when we
Yeah.
agree we sometimes still see it from like a slightly different angle.
Yeah. It's
So
good. It's
it
good. We
is.
have a good level of I agree with you, or at least understand what you're saying. Here's
Yeah.
why you're wrong, though. I think we have a good balance of that.
Right, right. So yeah, so I think that what I have found is that since I became an editor, I am much more critical of
Hmm.
any kind of storytelling than I used to be.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's hard to turn that inner editor off. And so I find that, so for example, like back in the days when we could leave the house in the olden times,
Mm.
we would go to the movies and I would go to the movies with my husband and, we'd come out and he'd say, what did you think of the movie? And he very quickly like learned after I started editing, like he does not like asking me that anymore.
Yeah, he regrets it immediately.
He does. Or I'll say like, I thought it was pretty good except for a few small things. And he never asks
He doesn't
anymore. Like,
follow.
what were those things? And
Mm.
especially like Star Wars, the new Star Wars movies that came out, he is like a mega Star Wars fan. And I am a much more casual fan.
Yeah.
So yeah,
There are opinions.
yes. And we prioritize our marriage over those opinions.
Smart. It's really smart. Um, that's interesting. I find with movies in particular, I can very easily shut off the editor brain and just kind of enjoy it. And it's only on like reflection afterwards where
Hmm.
I'm like, this could have been better because of XYZ or
Yeah.
whatever. But this podcast has made me be like, to watch it with the intent of editing has been pretty fun for me of like,
Yeah.
good job. I see what you did there, movie.
So, what do you feel like is different in your approach? Like when you watch a movie just to watch it and enjoy versus
Hmm.
when you're watching it for the podcast, like what do you think is different in your brain? How do you process it differently or like what?
Well, you see, Jenny, sometimes the neurons
Mm,
will,
you're going to explain brains to me now?
no,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't know them well enough. Don't put me on the spot like this.
You started it.
No, but it was a joke. Um, I think it's more about letting my analytical side of myself kind of come out instead of the escapism side.
Yeah.
I've especially with like being able to still read books for fun
Mhm.
can I've had to get really good at like just enjoy it, just let it happen to me instead of
Mhm.
trying to help. Um and I do that with in life in general of like you kind of have to shut down that side of yourself that's overly eager to help everybody.
Do you?
I try.
We might have to talk more about that offline. I might need some tips from you.
I try, Jenny. It's not always successful, but I try. Gotta turn that brain off sometimes. But now that we're doing the podcast, I'm definitely like I think almost slowing down
Yeah.
my watch. Like I'm not physically slowing it down, but I'm slowing down the processing of like, oh, this thing that they did is really interesting and here's why it works instead of just like the movie as a whole
Yeah.
is happening to me and enjoyable. So it's kind of about like switching that off a little bit and kind
Sure.
of processing more, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's like it's almost like a different level of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think typically a really good movie or a really good book, like you get very sucked into it.
Yeah.
And the ideal would be like you almost forget that you're watching a movie or reading a book and it feels like you're experiencing it instead.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the ideal. Um,
Yes.
so I think when you are watching a movie or reading a book, to get information from it instead, that it's a different level of awareness. So even though you can still kind of experience all of those feelings and everything, you might not get pulled into it as much. So, like sometimes people ask me about editing, like, do I ever get so involved in a book that I'm editing that I forget I'm editing? And the answer is no, not really.
No, I don't think
um,
that's ever happened to me.
and it doesn't mean that, I'm not enjoying the book or that I don't like it or it's not a good book. I think it's just a different awareness of it.
Exactly.
Um, and so, yeah, I think I do the same thing too, that, it's almost like, okay, so I'm gonna get really woo woo now. It's almost like meditating or like a mindfulness kind of situation,
Yes, totally.
where, you can have this, I think back to when I first started meditating and there was like this idea that like if you speak inside your head, who's the one speaking and who's the one listening kind of thing. So like on a normal
You're
see,
hurting my brain.
I told you it's gonna get deep. So on a
Okay.
normal day, you just have these thoughts going through your head and you aren't really super cognizant of them. You're not super aware of them. But when you're like really engaging in mindfulness, then you have that kind of awareness of what you're thinking instead. And it does create a little bit of a distance so that you're not feeling so like down in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's the same thing with reading or with watching a movie that you can sort of create this slight distance so that you can still enjoy it, you can still feel the feels, but it gives you like that awareness of it that you can be a little bit more analytical with it.
Yeah. You're basically trying to break your immersion.
Yeah. And I think that that's it's a helpful skill just to practice that
Yep.
when you are learning about storytelling, just to learn to be able to read from a more analytical point, or from or be able to watch something, be able to engage in any kind of story from that little bit of a slightly more distant standpoint, so that you can be more analytical.
Yeah, I agree. Because otherwise, you're going to kind of just write what you think you're seeing instead of analyzing why is this successful? How is this book evoking these feelings in me? It's not just saying, feel this, it's
Hmm.
making me feel them. And to kind of break those elements down and figure out the how and the why is really important when it comes to writing and editing yourself. And you kind of need to learn how to do those things. And the best way to do that is to analyze how other people do them.
Yeah. Well, it's really hard to analyze your own work,
Yeah.
for a lot of different reasons. Like our brains naturally fill in gaps.
Mhm.
So when we have the story in our head, our brain is going to just naturally fill in gaps when it's on the page, and we may not even realize that that's what we're doing. And then also, it's really hard when you've looked at something already several times. The more times you look at it, the more familiar with it you are, the more your brain fills in those gaps. And so it's
Mhm.
just really hard to be objective. It's
Yeah.
really hard to create that distance.
Right. If
Um,
you think in your head that you mentioned that this couple kissed in the past, but
yeah.
maybe you never actually put it on the page.
Or maybe that was in a previous revision
Yeah, maybe
and
it
it
got
got cut.
deleted at some point. You never know.
Yeah, it's true. So I think that practicing that same skill set with other people's stories
Mhm.
helps you get better at seeing your own stories more objectively as well. Because once you can kind of learn how to, again, kind of like meditation, once you learn to kind of turn that on, that like analytical part of your brain on, it helps you be more analytical about your own writing. And that's where, killing your darlings maybe doesn't hurt quite so bad anymore. Um, and you can learn how to self-edit kind of on another level then.
Yeah.
So why movies? Why was movies our pick instead of like reading books or watching TV shows or playing video games?
Because movies are faster.
They are. They are. I mean, sometimes if you're watching kids movies, they can be like an hour and 10
And
minutes, you know?
it's great.
I know. I know. And so, I mean, Carly's mentioned reading just for pleasure. It's something that we both struggle with,
It is.
because we read all day, every day.
Mhm.
And it's hard to like read all day, every day and then go like, oh, I'm gonna rewind. I'm gonna like unwind and read some more.
Yeah.
Because my brain's just like, nope.
No, let's just have TV happen to me,
Yes.
is usually where
Yes.
my brain goes.
And so like with a TV show or like a TV series, it probably isn't going to be as long as reading a book, depending on the series.
If we just did
Um,
one season.
yeah, but it's still like pretty long. So we thought that movies would be a pretty compact way
Mhm.
to be able to like get in a whole story for
Yeah.
that, analyzing.
Yeah, they kind of encapsulate things pretty succinctly.
Yeah.
So, and they have to be everything. Whereas with the TV show, they don't necessarily have to be everything because they're stringing you along and it's slightly different. Whereas a movie is more indicative of a single book because it has to be everything. It has to be a complete story.
Yeah.
Um, whereas like a TV show can do a subplot
Yeah.
for an episode.
Yeah. Well, and two,
Yeah.
like I've noticed on television shows recently, especially I think TV shows where they do like a season long arc, and often it's only like one season. So it's almost like a
Yeah.
mini series that they'll just do like a one season arc for a show. So I'm thinking like WandaVision,
Mhm.
that, just finished up, was just like this one off kind of thing.
Yep.
So a lot of times what I've seen happening is they'll do a whole episode that's a flashback episode. This happened in Lovecraft Country. I remember seeing it in Carnival Row that was on Amazon.
Mhm.
And every single time there's one of those episodes that it's all flashbacks. I'm like, nope, I'm out of here. And if that
Mhm.
were a book and it was like, a whole eighth of the book is going to be like a
A
flashback, I'd be
flashback,
like,
I'd be
nope.
out.
um,
Super out.
so I'm not sure that in that same way, I'm not sure that TV would be as good of a way for us to do this for the podcast, that it wouldn't be something we could do as consistently.
Yeah,
Um,
and they stretch the story out with
they do.
TV. So like when you see a TV show that's been that's based on a book, like they have to throw so much more in because they have so much more time
Yeah,
to kind of fill. Um it just, and also it would take us a long time every month to watch it, and it's not as accessible for people, I
it's
think.
true. It's true. So yeah. So we picked movies because we thought it would be something that would be good for us in terms of time, but also for our listeners.
Exactly.
We can do this podcast and they can listen to this like half hour. They're normally like half hour, 40-minute shows.
Hmm.
And then that weekend they can go and watch the movie themselves. And so the whole thing then, is only taking them a couple of hours. Um, and I'm
And yeah,
hoping,
I don't think any episode has ever been half an hour.
I feel like we had one that was like 35 minutes.
Yeah. We talk a lot.
I don't know what you
Just
mean.
saying. But yes, sorry. Your point still stands.
Yes. So I think it's good for our listeners too that we chose movies because it is something that is easily accessible. It is something that doesn't take up a lot of time.
Hmm.
So I think, and also, we didn't know when we did it that everybody was going to be stuck at home all the time for a year.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people have been watching a lot more movies
Yeah.
lately from home. So yeah, so I think I'm really excited by what it has sort of um, become. We weren't 100% sure when we got started that it was something we were going to want to keep doing.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And I think it's really, we hear all the time from authors about how helpful it is that
Yeah.
we give them a new perspective on some element of writing that they've been struggling with. So like, for example, our most recent episode was, well, at the time of this recording, we'll have another one come out before you actually
Oh,
get to
that's
see
true.
it. But our
It's
most
the
recent one,
future.
I know, I'm getting very meta now.
If you don't like meta talk, please don't listen to the theme episode.
Right, right.
We get very meta,
We do.
but
Themeception.
themeception. But our most recent was romantic tension and the sun is also a star.
Yes. Yes.
So
And I think that movie was great at that.
yeah.
And I've heard from a couple of authors already in the last couple of weeks that it really helped them nail their understanding of romantic tension and
Yeah.
figure out what was missing from the romantic tension in their novels.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
I know. It's so
I
great
like
to know.
feedback.
um,
Um,
Go ahead.
yeah. I feel like we got that a lot with the theme episode as well.
Hmm.
Because theme is kind of one of those very ethereal, I don't know why I say ethereal, intangible is the
Hmm.
word I'm looking for. Um, Topics or like pieces of advice, and it can be hard to break that down and find it in other things except to say, I feel like the theme was this, but why do I feel like that? And how do I incorporate that myself? How do I do it successfully? Can be really difficult to actually nail down. And so we try to kind of really break it down and be like, here's a good example of it. Here's how you can see it. Here's ways that it can be manipulated and things like that.
Yeah. And so I talked a little bit about how like TV shows are structured differently than movies. There is some of the same structure involved, but I think it's because, like Carly was saying, they have to kind of draw the story out and everything over many, many hours instead of just a couple of hours. Um, but one thing that I've thought about a lot, which we haven't talked about a lot on the podcast, is structure. We did finally do an episode
We
on
did.
structure.
Took
We
us a long time.
It did. We did an episode on Up, the Pixar movie Up. because Pixar has their own version of story structure that can be very helpful. Um, but for a long time, when we both first got started editing, authors were reading Save the Cat, the original
Yep.
version of Save the Cat. It was only a couple of years ago that they published Save the Cat writes a novel instead. And before that, for years and years, authors were looking to the original Save the Cat to help them with story structure. And the original Save the Cat is written for screenwriters, so people
Mm-hmm.
who are writing movies. And it's written in the idea of, so all of the percentages and beats and everything happen at certain minutes
Mm-hmm.
in a movie, versus, we look at kind of word count for a
Yeah.
novel.
Percentages.
Right. And so I think the reason that they wanted to Save the Cat writes a novel, my brain is just not processing all of those words,
It's all right.
is because so many authors were struggling to kind of match all of
Convert
those
it.
points up. But I think it's a great example of how you can look at movies and books in very much the same kind of context when it comes to storytelling.
Um, I was just thinking that I th- thinking about like endings and satisfying endings. I think movies more accurately convey what you need to do in a book versus TV shows
Yeah,
because you can have a cliffhanger at the end of a movie, but it still needs to feel like a conclusion.
sure.
And your book kind of needs that too. I was going off in a tangent basically in my own head about endings and
Thanks for
how
listening while I'm talking, Carly.
it's fine. It's pretty usual. But we do talk about it in our episode about Get Out and how like it still is kind of a cliffhanger, but it feels satisfying and it feels like a conclusion.
Yeah.
And movies need to do that more than TV shows. TV shows want you to just watch the next episode.
Hmm.
So they all semi end with a cliffhanger. And you
So
kind of need
agreed.
to really wrap your book up, even if you're ending with somewhat of a cliffhanger.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Um, while you were talking and I wasn't listening, I was thinking
Perfect.
about um, that story structure from Pixar,
Hmm.
and how it starts out with like, once upon a time there was, and then one day, this happened.
Because
And then,
of that.
yeah, but that kind of gives you like your setup, it gives you your inciting event, and then yeah, it has this like kind of series of like, because of that this happened, because of that the next thing happened,
Yep.
that helps you recognize that your scenes need to build on each other, as
Hmm.
opposed to like just one thing happening after another. It's not like, and then this happened and then that happened, it's because
Yeah.
of this happened. um so yeah, I think those kinds of things are really interesting to look at in movies as well as books.
Yeah. You kind of have to think of your inciting incident as like pushing the boulder down the hill
Yeah.
and the rest of the scenes just continually get or like let's say snowball pushing a snowball down the hill and it gets bigger and bigger and builds on each other.
Right.
um and one thing causes the next thing which causes the next thing,
Mm-hmm.
and movies do that very well. It's not just a character there letting things happen to them.
Right.
They think scenes build.
Right. So if an author wanted to start watching movies
Hmm.
to learn about storytelling,
Hmm.
how would you tell someone to get started with that? What would your advice be?
Just listen to the podcast.
We don't instruct them on how to do it, though.
No, but like just don't bother. Just listen to us. No, I'm just kidding. Um, I would tell them to really try to like slow down and process what is happening in the movie. Like we were
Mm,
saying in the beginning of what we have to do of turning off our viewer brain and turning on your editor brain. Um, Maybe take notes. I do find it could be helpful if you have a topic in mind,
yeah.
um, to kind of be like, I need to learn more about structure, or I need to learn more about romantic tension, and I'm going to watch this romance movie and kind of see and make note of where I feel tense or where I feel the romance is building and why
Yeah.
do I feel that, and kind of try to break down the separate parts
Mhm.
that you're seeing the movie hit, because the movie is definitely hitting very specific formulaic things. And that then when you have all those notes, you can kind of process, okay, so how do I do that successfully? What do they do that I can do in writing?
Yeah.
And it can be hard, and we do talk about it sometimes in the podcast, because movies have a different tool set that they can kind of pull from. They have visual aids and actors that can show things differently than you can in your writing. So that can be difficult to convert, but it's also a tool for you to use to see, okay, this is how people move.
Mhm.
I can now convert what they're doing into my writing. So take notes and slow
Yeah.
it down, basically, would be my
Yeah.
advice. What
I
about
think
you?
so. I think if I really like the advice to have a theme in mind, some kind of topic in mind before you get started watching a movie. And I might even say to try to do a little bit of research, even if that's just asking your friends,
Yeah.
in terms of like what's a movie that does this well.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're watching something with the idea of like, oh, I want to learn how to do romantic tension, and then you watch something where the like love interests have no chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
that can be
Or no
very
romance at
disappointing.
all.
Yes, yes. So I think that I think one thing you can do is you can rewatch, like we were talking about, you can rewatch a movie that you've seen, rewatch one of your old favorites.
Yeah. I think that's a
Um
great place to start
and
too.
then you can kind of pick it apart instead.
Yeah.
It I think it helps to have some idea of what's going to happen, because then you don't get so invested in like
Yep.
that moment of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen. So it can be helpful in that way in terms of having that little bit of distance from it. Also, yeah, so if you can't think of anything that is going to help with the particular topic that you're struggling with, you can ask your friends about it. You can, I mean, Google, I'm sure, is a fabulous resource for that. I would probably do a Twitter poll. I have done Twitter polls for, or asked on Twitter for movie recommendations for the
Yep.
podcast.
We
Um,
definitely don't struggle with picking the movies at all.
so yeah, I think all of those. I would also say that it can go really well as part of an overall sort of self course of study. So I think that watching movies is one tool in your toolbox, but
Mm-hmm.
that it shouldn't be your only tool.
Definitely not.
I would also recommend, I mean, if you're here, you're listening to panels, podcasts, of course, can be fabulous, but also craft books can be really great.
Mm-hmm.
There's tons of blog advice out there. And then I often recommend to my editing clients to um, take a novel that's in their same genre and age category as what they're writing, and really kind of pick that apart in the same
Mm-hmm.
way, mark it up, highlight it. Anyone who knows me knows like this suggestion of writing in books and highlighting them is
Hurts
like,
you.
this is basically sacrilege to me. So that's how important I feel like it is. So I think movies should be one part of that overall toolkit. And it can work really well. So like we'll use the romance example still. So, we used The Sun Is Also a Star as our romantic tension movie. A book that you could read, a craft book that you could read for that is Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes, is a
Love
fabulous
that
book
book.
for romance. And then, you could pick out your favorite romance novel that you could read. I don't recommend watching a movie and the novel of the
Nope.
same,
Nope. Don't do
because
that.
then you can get very caught up in like what's different. And
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of counterproductive when you're trying to study storytelling. Um, I do also want to say I don't think that there's anything. wrong with watching a movie that's not good at doing something. And
Right.
we've had some people suggest like it would be helpful to them to like hear what's not good about
Yeah.
some of these movies
And why
too.
it doesn't, why it's not successful can be very important.
Right. And we decided pretty early on we wanted to stick to one topic per
Yep.
episode as opposed to like watching a movie and breaking it all down into all of its storytelling elements.
It'd be a much longer podcast if we did that.
And like you said, we already have a hard time keeping it short. So
Yeah.
we'd be on there for like 6 hours if we were breaking down
We could
movies.
do like one movie a year if we did it that way, I feel
Let's do
like.
like a whole season about one movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
perfect.
Love
Next
it.
season.
No,
Totally changing the format of the show now.
for
Um,
forever.
but I do think that there is something to be said for finding things that don't work as
There
well as
is.
things that do. So if you notice when you're watching the movie, if you notice something that you feel like is not working, make notes about that too. It can sometimes take longer for you to get through a movie if you're pausing it every few minutes to make notes about things. But it also means, unless you're studying like structure specifically,
Mm-hmm.
you don't even necessarily have to watch the whole movie.
Yeah, you don't.
So like if you are studying romantic tension, you don't even necessarily have to watch the whole movie. So I think it is something that it comes in this really like compact package.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it much more accessible in general.
Right. And like definitely read very widely in the
Yeah.
genre that you're trying to write. Um, but right, movies can be a nice tool, a quicker way to do it, um, an easy way to kind of step away from necessarily comparing yourself, because I think when you read and you're trying to learn how to write through reading, it can get very um, imposter syndrome y,
Yeah.
and you can easily just be like, well, I'm never going to write something this good.
Yep.
And it can kind of take you out of the fact that you're trying to learn and be better, and no one's the same. But movies can kind of offer a different perspective where you can still learn those tools without feeling like you're failing at creating something equally as good, because it's a completely different medium.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's a really good point.
yeah, but
Yeah.
still read in your genre. It's very clear when authors do not know their genre at all.
Yeah.
So please do that.
So you mentioned some of the things that movies can do that books can't do. So
Hmm.
like you can physically show what people are doing.
Yeah.
You
Music
know,
is a big part of that too.
it
Music can
is.
really evoke emotions in a specific way that you definitely cannot convey in a book.
Right. And you don't necessarily have to spend as much time on like the setting
Hmm.
or descriptive details because that's something that we're taking in as everything else is happening. And it can be difficult to sort of translate those kinds of elements into um, your writing. So it's really why we focus more on like the storytelling aspect of it
Yeah.
because it can be difficult to translate those things.
We
Um,
do touch on it sometimes. I'm just thinking
we
of
do.
like our A Quiet Place episode. We talk
Hmm.
about show versus tell. Um, and in that one, we do talk about how the characters are interacting with the scene. And at least in a movie, yes, it's all just kind of happening at the same time and happening to you. But it is a good way to see, like, okay, I'm going to show the setting as my characters move through it and utilize it. And I'm going to show specific things that have meaning and stuff like that. So, like, you can still take some stuff, even
Sure.
though it's definitely very, very difficult. I think we
Well,
talk about music in the voice episode as well.
right. And then I think we use, at least I think a lot of editors and people in publishing use a sort of metaphor of the camera lens and what
Hmm.
it would, what is the camera focusing on in a movie, sort of being the equivalent of what is your narrative focusing on when you're talking about descriptions and body language and those kinds of things. So I think
Yeah.
you can definitely take some of that away. Um, It also has its limitations, though.
It does.
So for example, if you are struggling with interiority, that's not something that movies can really help you with. Movies are typically all external, and
Hmm.
anything that's happening inside, is gonna have to either be conveyed through their actions, um, or worse, we might get, like, voiceover.
Yeah. There's some good intense voiceover work. Like you can find some good stuff. Jenny, I see your look and I know you are doubting this. Um,
I think it can work, I just
it
think it
can
doesn't
work.
it
It's
doesn't work as often as they want it to.
I agree.
My husband just watched The Crow, for the first time in a long time, and, we were talking about, it has voiceover at the very beginning and at the very end, and that was apparently something that was added, because, the main actor, was killed in that movie during the process of filming, and so there were scenes that they weren't able to film that needed to be in the movie, and so they added the voiceover to, kind of make up for those, and I think in this movie it works very well, but it doesn't always.
No, that's totally fair.
So what are some
Yeah.
other kinds of limitations that you can think of that are things that you might be struggling with in your writing that movies may not really be able to help you with?
That's a tough one. I definitely think interiority is one. You can kind of really only get that from a movie through how the actor acts,
Yes.
like any kind of physicality.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's definitely useful for interiority. But it pretty much stops there.
Yeah.
Um, oh gosh, I'm trying to think what other limitations are there. I think it's a very different flow. I think like when you get into like the nitty-gritty of writing of like sentence structure and flow and how to make
Right.
like the page feel good and feel easy to read, and like white space and things like that.
Yeah.
You definitely can't get from a movie because again, just different mediums.
Sure.
Trying to think what else. I'm not really
I
sure.
think world building can be very different. Like, you
It's
can
very
still
different.
take that away, but yeah,
Our
because you
first
don't.
episode, we did world
We did,
building.
we did. And it is something, but I think it's something that, if you're really struggling with world building, movies can, I think watching movies that are rich in world building, can be very helpful, but you do have to be very analytical about it when you
Yeah,
watch those.
right. How you implement it is vastly different.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely limitations, and it's
Yeah.
definitely, I think maybe the biggest limitation is figuring out how to interpret and like convert the story elements that you're seeing into your own writing because like you're saying with the world building like you can see amazing worlds and get a great idea for how to build a very gorgeous lush world
Mhm.
in your head though getting
Yeah.
it onto the page and interpreting how to translate that can be really difficult.
Right. And, I think the other part of that is, when you do try to create that sense of this lush world building, that you it can be very easy to kind of go over the top with it in writing,
Yes.
because you wanna, like, get into all of those little tiny details and everything that you have in your head that you would see in a movie, and then in writing, it, doesn't always work to give us that level of detail, so
Yeah.
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 So I
There
agree, and that's why I think that movies being part of your toolbox,
exactly.
is such an important, point that I will reiterate it. It's not a substitute for reading.
Nope.
It is something that can help, but you still have to read too.
Yeah.
But I think a lot about, like, people who have multiple jobs, people who might be caretakers for somebody or caregivers for somebody, Um, and so they end up with very limited time for reading. Sometimes you can still do some of those other things while you are watching a movie still. So,
I'm just impressed that you were able to talk through Phil showing up.
if I couldn't, I'd never be able to talk.
That's fair. Yeah, I guess our listeners don't know that Phil usually shows up during our recordings, and it's lovely.
He was like, "You
Um,
can't record without me, guys."
I know he's really the spine that holds this podcast
He
together.
really is. He really is. I don't know how we would do it without him.
I don't know. But no, I completely agree. I think it's also a good tool because it's kind of good to break away from that writing mode and reading mode because you kind of need to it I'm having trouble formulating words here, but kind of breaking out of that mold and experiencing story in a different way
Yeah.
can open your brain up in other ways and kind of reinvigorate you in different fun, interesting ways. It's just basically kind of like a good like palate cleanser maybe
Right.
is kind of what I would think about or how I would think about it because movies can just be something different that you're experiencing and how does it open up other avenues for you that you maybe haven't considered
Hmm.
because with reading and writing it be very easy to like get stuck in the one thing you know how to do or the one way you've seen it done um, and it can be hard to kind of stretch your brain and come at something from a different angle.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you are a visual learner, especially,
Mm-hmm.
that movies can be really good for you. And in that same way, if you're an auditory learner, then podcasts like storytelling podcasts. One that I recommend a lot is LeVar Burton Reads. It's short stories, but they're really, really, really good. Very often from one podcast that I often recommend is LeVar Burton Reads. It's all short stories. He does a fabulous job reading them. It's more than a little bit of nostalgia for those of us who grew up watching Reading Rainbow. But he's a really fabulous narrator too.
Yeah,
And the
he's great.
authors are often award-winning authors. And they're normally Black authors, authors of color, and authors from other marginalized communities as well. So it's just
Yeah,
a really fabulous podcast. So if you're an auditory learner, that's something that you can do as well. Um,
or audiobooks too.
yes, yes, absolutely. So I think it's just about really paying attention to all of these different kinds of um, access that we have to story in all of these different formats and mediums.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I really like watching movies, I must say. It's been good because I tend to just watch TV, so it's been nice to be like, I'm gonna sit down and watch a movie today.
It's true. It's true. I feel like I don't watch as many movies as I maybe did when I was younger.
Same.
So yeah. So what else? You have anything else to say? I
I
think
think
that's about it for me.
I think so. Shut off your like experiencing brain and turn on your
Yeah.
editing brain. Slow things down. Maybe have a theme in mind. Make sure it's a good movie example of such
Yeah.
theme and really try to break down the why of
Yeah.
why it is working.
Oh, something else I think that it's just now coming to me.
Oh,
I feel like talking to you about the movies often gives me a different perspective on it.
yeah.
So, I think it'd be really cool to do that. Like if you're going to do it, to do it with a writing friend, a
Yeah.
critique partner.
Do it with like
And
a writing group. We
yeah,
could start a whole like tradition.
that would be a lot of fun, I think.
That would be so fun.
So I think, having other people to help you process would
Yeah.
also be really great.
I mean, I was hoping you were going to be like listening to you, Carly, so everyone should just listen to you and talk to you about it.
Then I'd have
But
to share you.
that's fair. It's really fair. You're being like so complimentary. It's weird. Um, But yeah, no, I love that idea of like maybe starting your own little group or partner to do it with, because we both definitely see different things in movies. Usually
We
when
do.
we watch a movie, we come back, we're like, all right, well, here were the things that I noticed. What did you notice? What do we want to talk about? What do we think it did best? It's
Right.
pretty fun.
Well, I think movies like books are sort of an interactive experience. Someone else has created the story, but then as the consumer, you come to it with all of your own previous experience and your personality. And so we each see something a little different in it.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's a great point.
yeah,
I
yeah,
like that. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This was such a fun chat. I hope you learned how to find storytelling elements yourself when watching movies and hopefully find ways to make your own writing better.
yeah. And so our podcast is Story Chat Radio, and you can find us at storychatradio.com. You can find us on pretty much all of the big streaming services.
I think
And if
so.
there's one that you use that you can't find us on, please let us know and we'll get on there.
We will get there.
We will. And we're also on Instagram and Twitter at Story Chat Radio. And then you can find me at my website, which is JennyChappelleEditorial.com. And of course, at Right Hive, I'm always hanging out there. So,
Yeah. Um, Same with Right Hive. I'm at booklighteditorial.com. So you can find me there. Oh, and we didn't mention because we forgot, but if you follow us on Twitter, you can enter every month to receive a free query or blurb critique that we'll talk about at the end of each podcast episode.
that's right. That's right. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And hope you have a great time with Right Hive. And, let us know what questions you have, what thoughts you have. We'll be happy to talk with you about this.
Thank you.
Bye bye.